As the sun sets over the dusty plains of the Wild West, a name sows fear in the hearts of all who hear it. Jim Miller, the most feared assassin in the West. But who is this mysterious figure, and what has made him so dangerous? Enjoy this video as we dive into the life and legacy of Jim Miller to uncover the truth about this legendary figure.
James Jim Brown Miller is a name that instills fear in the hearts of many who know his story. He is one of the most brutal men in the Old West, a former Texas Ranger law officer, outlaw, and professional killer. Miller is believed to have killed 12 people in gunfights and more during outlaw operations and missions. Despite his deadly reputation, Miller was often well-dressed and well-mannered, earning him the nickname Deacon Miller for his frequent visits to church. But as the saying goes, looks can be deceiving, and Miller is nothing more than a wolf in sheep's clothing. Miller's violent tendencies seem to have developed from an early age, earning him a reputation as a bad seed. Born on October 25, 1861, some sources list October 24, 1866, in Van Buren, Arkansas, Miller moved to Texas with his family at the age of 1. His father, Jacob, was a stonemason who helped build the first Capitol structure in Austin, but he died when Miller was 8 years old. There were rumors that Miller was responsible for the deaths of his grandparents, but these allegations were never proven. However, Miller's violent tendencies continued to escalate, and it was not long before he became a notorious outlaw that terrified many. In 1880, Jim Miller was living with his mother and siblings in Coryell County. 4 years later, his sister Georgia married a man named John Coop, whom Jim Miller couldn't stand. On July 30th, 1884, John Coop was brutally murdered with a shotgun while he was lying in bed at his home about 8 miles northwest of Gatesville, Texas. People in the area were all too familiar with Jim's grudge against his brother-in-law, and he was arrested for murder soon after. He was tried, found guilty, and sentenced to life in prison. However, his lawyers appealed the verdict, and it was technically overturned by the Texas Court of Appeals. After his release, Miller joined an outlaw gang in San Saba County, Texas, and began carrying out robberies and arson, often resulting in loss of life. He also bought half the profits of a local tavern in San Saba. Miller's real talent is as an assassin, where he is known for being quick and efficient, often using shotguns to ambush targets at night. He claims to kill anyone as long as he gets paid for the job, with prices ranging from $150 to $2,000. Miller appeared to be a respectable man, always well-dressed and polite. He never said profanity, smoked, or drank. But underneath this appearance, he is a man with a dark and violent nature. Despite his calm demeanor, Miller is known to be short-tempered and is not afraid to use a gun when necessary. He is an expert in the art of murder and is not afraid to take someone's life. He is also a notorious poker player and has been involved in several deadly bar fights. In 1882, Miller was arrested and disarmed by the young San Saba Deputy Sheriff D. Harkey, who would later become one of the West's most prominent lawyers. However, Miller soon drifted to McCulloch County, where he worked as a cowboy for Emanuel Mannon Clements Sr., cousin of the infamous John Wesley Hardin. Miller became close friends with Mannon's son and daughter and eventually married Mannon's daughter, Sally. They had 4 children together. After his marriage, Miller traveled to southeastern New Mexico and West Texas along the Mexican border. His activities during this time were mostly unknown, but he later bragged about his participation in killing Mexicans at the border. In 1891, Jim Miller was living in Peckles, Texas, when Sheriff George A. of Reeves County, who had been in the position for less than a year, desperately needed a deputy in a border town. Unconcerned with Miller's past, Sheriff George A. hired him on the spot. In 1892, Miller ran for sheriff of Peckles against Bud Fraser, but ultimately lost. However, This defeat did not prevent Miller from being appointed Field Marshal of the city of Pecos. As Field Marshal, he hired his brother-in-law, Manny Clements, as his deputy and surrounded himself with other skilled shooters, including Bill Earhart, John Denson, and Martin Q. Hardin. It is worth noting that both John and Martin Q. Hardin refer to themselves as cousins of John Wesley Hardin, although they are not actually related. Overall, Jim Miller's rise to power in Pecos was driven by his willingness to use violence to achieve his goals. His relationship with his cousin Hardin also suggests that he may have been involved in criminal activities outside of his official duties as field marshal. In May 1893, Pecos Sheriff Fraser was away, leaving the town vulnerable to Jim Miller's ruthless gang. Miller, along with his close friends, is planning a secret plot to assassinate the sheriff when he returns. The plan was to hold a gunfight on the platform, and a third man would shoot Fraser, making it look like a stray bullet took his life. The gang's evil plan was thwarted when Con Gibson, a local, overheard their plot while in a pub and informed the sheriff. Fraser quickly contacted the Texas Rangers for assistance. When Fraser arrived, he was escorted by the captain of the Texas Rangers, John R. Hughes. Miller, Clements, and Martin Hardin are soon arrested for plotting to kill the sheriff. The case was moved to El Paso for trial, but the prosecution's primary witness, Con Gibson, fled to Eddy, New Mexico. The state had no choice but to release the prisoners due to lack of evidence. April 18, 1894. Bud Fraser caught Jim Miller on the street and he shouted, "You're a murderer and a plucker." Fraser then opened fire on Miller. The bullet lodged in the arm near Miller's shoulder. Miller attempted to return fire, but the only casualty was a local storekeeper, Joe Cross, who was grazed by the bullet. The situation quickly took a turn for the worse when Fraser shoved his pistol into Miller's chest, knocking him down to the ground. Done, Bud quickly left. Looks like the time of hired killers has finally come. But to everyone's surprise, Miller wasn't dead yet. When they examined Miller's wounds, they discovered something unusual, a metal breastplate that Miller had worn under his jacket. It is clear that Miller is always one step ahead, and that is why he always wears very loose shirts. In late 1896, despite knowing Jim Miller intended to kill him, Bud Fraser made the fatal mistake of visiting his family in Toyah, Texas that September. On the morning of September 14th, Bud was playing cards with his friends in a local pub. Suddenly, Miller kicked open the door and fired both pistols straight into Fraser's head, to his sister's horror. "You're just like your brother. I'll shoot you in the face." Law enforcement officials are now more determined than ever to bring him to justice. Once again, the cunning and cruel Jim Miller escaped punishment for the murder of Fraser. He argued that Fraser had not done better than him. During the trial, a man named Joe Earp, who testified against Miller, became his next target. Miller reportedly shot him down and then rode 100 miles overnight to establish an alibi. This is not the first time Miller had used such tactics to evade justice. His ability to manipulate the legal system and evade the consequences for his actions makes him a dangerous and notorious figure in the Wild West. Pat Garrett, who was famous for killing Billy the Kid, was killed on February 28, 1908, near Las Cruces, New Mexico, allegedly due to a land dispute. While Jim Miller was initially charged with murder, the reliability of the charges were questioned for years. The confession of Jesse Wayne Brazel, who claimed to have killed Garrett in self-defense, further complicated the case and eventually led to Brazel's acquittal. Despite the legal outcome, the mystery of Pat Garrett's death remains the subject of interest and speculation in Western history. Jim Miller, known for his atrocities, was contracted by ranchers Jesse West and Joe Allen to commit murder in Ada, Oklahoma. The victim was Allen Augustus Gus Bobbitt, a cattle rancher and former vice marshal of the United States. The motive behind the murder was said to be to gain Bobbitt's land or to satisfy a personal grudge. Miller was offered $1,700 for the job. On February 27, 1909, Miller ambushed near Bobbitt's ranch. When Bobbitt and his tenant Bob Ferguson arrived from town in their supply wagons, Miller coldly pulled the trigger and fired 2 fatal shots at Bobbitt, hitting him in the ribs. Immediately, Bobbitt fell from the lead wagon, while Miller fled the scene en route to Fort Worth, passing Ferguson. Before Bobbitt's death, his wife claimed Miller was the one who assaulted her husband. The murder was witnessed by Oscar Peeler, a 19-year-old cowboy who was offered $50 to lead Miller to Bobbitt. The Texas Rangers later captured Miller in Texas, and he was extradited to Oklahoma to stand trial along with West, Allen, and Burrell. Miller's actions were purely evil, and he has no regrets about his heinous actions. He is willing to receive money to commit the act of murder, showing a lack of humanity. The town of Ada is on the sidelines when they learn that the evidence against the 4 suspects is not strong enough and the chances of them being acquitted are high. However, some have taken matters into their own hands after Stevenson, a suspect in the murder of Town Marshal Rudolph Cathy, was recently acquitted. On April 19, 1909, an angry mob estimated at 30 to 200 people broke into prison and dragged 4 suspects out of an abandoned stable. Miller, known for his ruthless attitude, remained calm while others begged for mercy. He made 2 final demands: his diamond ring to be given to his wife, and that he be allowed to wear the black hat when he was hanged. The mob approved both requests, but declined his further request to die in his black cloak. With a defiant shout of "Let her rip," Miller voluntarily stepped out of his box to hang himself, while the bodies of the other 3 were hung beside him. The gruesome scene lasted for several hours, with the bodies of 4 men on display until a photographer was dispatched to capture the moment. These haunting photos have been sold to tourists in Ada for years. The violent ending of these 4 men serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of vigilant justice and the consequences of embracing the law on your own.
Please like and share if you find the video content interesting and useful. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment below so as not to miss the upcoming interesting videos. Thanks for watching.